Hey internets, a lot of memes tend to be pretty short-lived, but one that seems to be standing the test of time is the NPC meme, or non-player character meme. And this video is going to explore just why that may be. The main reason is probably that the NPC meme represents an issue that may be as old as human society itself. It represents those who simply do not make any attempt at intellectual independence whatsoever. Anyone who considers themselves to be a rationalist to any degree has probably run into these types of people before. You know, the type of person who seems to have thoughts that eerily mirror whatever the latest mainstream news headlines has told them to think. They turn the TV on, download their latest approved opinions from MSNPC, and will then regurgitate those MSNPC opinions they just downloaded, as if they are talking points that are the most brilliant and intellectual and philosophical points ever. They seem to sincerely believe that this makes them count as an informed individual. This is why a lot of memes also get tied into the NPC meme a lot, like the current thing meme, where people are always just kind of regurgitating the current thing, thinking that it, again, is the most amazing thing ever. This is the type of person who always follows whatever is hip and trendy to the point where it seems that this current thing is their entire personality. Which led to some interesting takes. Some people on the internets have even started to ask themselves, are these people even real? They go diving sometimes into these deep, esoteric, spiritual explanations for the existence of all of these NPCs who seem to have infested this society that we live in. And some of these takes can get pretty darn out there. For instance, this meme. It was the Gnostics who warned us of these three types of souls: the Hylics, the Psychics, and the Pneumatics. Hylics, the spiritually unconscious, identified within materialism and base instincts, difficult or impossible to awaken. Psychics, spiritually conscious, instinctively feel there is more to life and can be awakened with effort. And you kind of get the picture. This meme is pretty much way out there. It offers an interesting, most likely wrong, but interesting, admittedly, sort of analysis at what the NPC is, as if they're some kind of spiritual being that represents those who do not have enough psychic powers within them. Another weird one is this idea that heaven has actually ran out of souls in order to reincarnate into the earth, because there's too many people walking around for souls in heaven to keep up with. So now the gods are populating the earth with these sort of mindless zombies that sort of are pre-programmed to act as if they have thoughts and emotions and whatnot, but they don't actually have any kind of free will, or a soul as you could call it. They are just sort of mindless meat bags, otherwise known as a philosophical zombie, which is someone who behaves as if they are a real person, but they do not actually have any real conscious thought. Now, while these supernatural explanations for the NPC phenomenon and meme may seem silly in a bizarrely interesting way, well, let's just be perfectly honest here, they're probably not true. It brings with it this age-old idea that some of the people walking around us just are not able to be awakened to the truth and don't really care about the truth, or they have an alternative idea of what truth even is. And that, I think, offers an alternative and much more simple explanation for what an NPC actually is. What the NPC really represents is the fact that there are two kinds of people when it comes to looking at what is true. A normal, ordinary, rational human being, when confronted with information, will simply ask themselves, is this information true? And they will use facts and logic and reason and rationality to determine whether or not what they have been presented is true. Since at the end of the day, the only thing that really matters about a fact is whether or not it is a fact in the first place. And then everything else that matters about it can be determined after that. The NPC, on the other hand, when they are confronted with information that may or may not be factual, they ask themselves a very different question. They ask, is it okay for me to believe that this is true? Rather than simply asking, is this true? The NPC spends significantly less time on the facts and the logic behind it. They don't really look so much at the evidence first, but rather they instead ask themselves whether or not they are allowed to believe that this is true. In other words, the NPC passes what they believe to be true through various completely irrelevant filters before they allow themselves to believe that something is true. The most common of these filters that NPCs often filter their reasoning on what is a fact and what is not, it would be the consensus filter. For instance, an NPC is very likely to say something like, it's the consensus, when asked whether or not something is true. Of course, you ask them, why is it the academic consensus? And they, of course, are unable to answer because the NPC does not know. They've never actually thought about it that far. They simply know that it's the consensus, therefore in their minds it must be true. Now, to the rational person, this is obviously invalid reasoning because it's just a bandwagon fallacy. You need to actually understand why something is a fact in order to honestly state that you understand that fact. The rational person understands that it is the facts, data, and logic that was used to come to that academic consensus that makes a fact true, whereas the NPC unironically seems to believe that it is true simply because it is the consensus, which reveals that the NPC cares less about what is true and instead instead cares more about what will give them prestige within the society that they are in. This is especially bad in certain fields like postmodernist sociology, where the more you understand these studies, the more you realize that they're basically total bogus. Another very common type of filter that NPCs like to use for determining truth is the moralistic filter, sometimes also known as either the moralistic fallacy or the ought-is fallacy. This is when a person does not understand that what they want to be true for moral and ethical reasons has absolutely no relation to what is true. The most common example being people who do not understand that just because it seems like it should be morally good that people are equal doesn't necessarily mean that people are equal. It's not proof that people are equal just because you believe that to be morally righteous. And again, this is something that the rational person understands. Ethics is independent of truth. It is completely irrelevant. It does not matter, at least when it comes to determining what is true. After you have determined what is true, then you can talk about ethics, but for determining what is true in the first place, the ethical component has absolutely no say whatsoever. The NPC, of course, either does not understand this or just flat out does not care. Another very common NPC filter is the feels filter, where something only counts as true to them if it makes them feel good. If something makes them feel bad, then the NPC tries to ignore it. For example, leaks that reveal that your country may be involved in war crimes. This, of course, may make people very uncomfortable to know that their own military is in fact not actually the good guys trademark. The Hans are we the baddies moment makes them feel bad, therefore it must not be true, at least in the minds of the NPC. Whereas again, the rational person does not ask themselves this, because the rational person understands that feels are not reals, and thus this is a silly thing to even ask themselves. And all of this converges to make these people behave in what you would call a non-player character. Because they filter their understanding of reality through so many intellectually dishonest barriers, they end up in a situation where they are only able to regurgitate what each other has said. They're only able to say things if they are considered morally good, and if it's the consensus, and if it gives everybody good feels, and so on and so forth, etc., etc. And that is why these people never have anything interesting to say. That is why when a rational person is talking to an NPC, they will often find themselves in this strange position where they can almost easily predict exactly what the NPC will say next, because you've heard it a million times already. They have nothing interesting to say because the NPC has made no attempt at intellectual honesty. It's not so much that the NPC lacks self-awareness. All of that esoteric stuff is probably just silly, nonsensical memeing. What's actually going on here is that these people are simply afraid to go against the grain. And all of this makes NPCs fairly easy to spot in the wild. NPCs will always say things that rely on the fallacies that I just mentioned. For instance, an NPC will claim to be a data scientist while telling you that whether or not something is consistent with your moral principles has anything to do with whether or not data should be taken seriously, which is of course a completely ridiculous moralistic fallacy. Or if you tell an NPC something that they do not like, the NPC will try to shame you as a member of the outgroup rather than actually address what you have said. For instance, if you were to encounter the postmodernist progressive type of NPC, and you tell them something that does not agree with their progressive worldview, they will reject you purely on the grounds that you are not as progressive as them, not on any kind of grounds that what you've said is factually untrue or not. As for why the NPC meme has gained popularity in recent years, I believe it has something to do with the fact that unfortunately, a lot of these people have infected our intellectual elites, or how our intellectual institutions have unfortunately been captured by midwits as a result of the workings of the cathedral, where people are rewarded with academic credentials not based on their ability, but based on their willingness to basically just regurgitate the bandwagon appeal, and regurgitate the moralistic appeal, regurgitate the approved opinions trademark, and regurgitate the current thing. The NPC meme therefore just represents a mockery of this particular type of intellectual fraudulence that we are seeing in our world. A lot of these Western institutions are regularly pushing nonsensical propaganda that is pretty easy for a rational person to debunk just using pure reason alone. The NPC meme thus gives us a tool that we can use to call out those who fall for this propaganda as simply being either too cowardly or too simple-minded to actually question what they are being told. The good news is it's entirely possible for an NPC to become a player character and basically wake up and realize that they are being controlled. It's a simple matter of realizing that fitting in isn't worth being a total zombie. Because while those of us who have decided to no longer seek prestige within the cathedral indeed often face ostracization and cancellations, it's well worth it to be free to think without any of these ridiculous, unnecessary restraints that the NPC shackles themselves with. Anyways, that's all I have to say for now. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to like, subscribe, or leave a tip on my Ko-Fi and whatever. And until next time, have a good one.